She didn't expect anything to come of it. The truck was listed for $1. No engine, no backstory, just rust and faded paint. But when she stood in front of it, boots planted in cracked pavement, something about it felt unfinished. What she didn't know was that this forgotten fire truck was hiding more than history. It was holding a story that would pull her into something far bigger than herself. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this remind you that some things are worth saving, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story might just restore your faith in what's possible. The fire truck listing didn't even have a photo, just 2 words: must haul. She clicked it out of boredom at first, still sitting on the concrete floor of her closed garage, with grease on her hands and a cold cup of coffee beside her. Rent was past due. Her last customer hadn't paid. Her business partner had bailed 3 months ago and taken the shop's savings with him. She had $23 in her account. When the salvage yard confirmed the listing price exactly $1, she laughed. It was the kind of stupid thing you did when you had nothing left to lose. A broken-down 1970s fire engine for $1? Sure. Why not? She transferred the money, packed her tools into a duffel, and rented a flatbed with the last of her gas money. By noon, she was on her way to a town she didn't know, to pick up a truck no one wanted. The engine yard was a graveyard. Rows of dented buses, police cruisers with missing doors, even an old ambulance slowly being eaten by vines. But at the very back, behind 2 rusted-out delivery vans, sat the fire truck. Its paint had faded from red to something like dried blood. Most of the lights were smashed. The cab windows were coated in years of grime. But what made her stop wasn't the condition. It was the smell. Not the usual musty rot of old upholstery and time, but something sharp, burnt, like ash that never left. She stepped closer, brushing tall grass aside. A raccoon darted out of the wheel well and vanished into the weeds. She didn't flinch. She was already committed. The tow operator grunted when he saw what she was hauling. "You're sure this thing ain't cursed?" he joked. She didn't laugh, just handed him the straps and told him to back up slow. The drive back was quiet. She followed behind the flatbed in a borrowed truck with no radio, watching the skeleton of the fire engine sway slightly with each bump in the road. People stared at stoplights. One kid even took a photo from the sidewalk. She didn't care. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel like a metronome, mind racing with questions she didn't have the energy to ask. She'd fix it up if she could. Maybe part it out. Maybe make a roadside coffee stand. Something. Anything. Because the truth was, she wasn't just bringing home a truck. She was dragging back her last shot, her last project, her last proof to herself that she hadn't failed completely. When they reached her garage, the sun was dipping low. The driver unloaded the truck and drove off without a word. She stood there for a long time, staring up at the rusted beast in front of her, her arms crossed and her boots crunching broken glass. And then she climbed into the cab. The driver's door groaned open. The air inside was thick with dust and heat. But something on the dash caught her eye. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with time, wedged between the gauges like it had been waiting for her. She didn't open the note right away. The air in the cab was thick, the kind that clung to your skin and didn't let go. Every surface was layered in grime. The steering wheel had cracked in 3 places. The bench seat sagged under her weight, fabric torn like claw marks. She sat still for a moment, hand resting near the yellowed paper, almost afraid that touching it would break whatever invisible thread had led her here. Eventually, she reached forward, pulled it free, and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, like it had been scribbled in a moving vehicle. 3 words. "Do not forget." That was it. No signature, no explanation. Just a message that felt more like a warning than a note. She looked around the dashboard, trying to find a context. The radio was missing. The odometer frozen. Dust coated everything. But then she noticed the glove compartment was sealed shut with duct tape layers of it, hardened and cracked with time. She picked at the edge until a piece gave way, then pulled the rest off in clumps. The latch creaked. Inside was a small black firefighter's notebook, the kind issued by the station, along with a tarnished medal looped onto a broken chain. She turned the medal over in her palm. St. Florian, patron of firefighters. The back was engraved. B. Tiernan, Engine 6. Her pulse kicked a little harder. The ledger looked untouched for decades, but the pages were still legible. She flipped past incident logs and supply notes until she reached a section marked personal in all caps. There, in uneven handwriting, someone had started a list names, dates, and then underlined twice. Last ride, June 19, 1997. Never forget. She traced the ink with her finger. This wasn't just a truck. It had gone somewhere it wasn't meant to come back from. She didn't know how yet. But something had happened that summer. Something that made this fire truck more than just steel and hoses. The sun dipped behind the trees, throwing long shadows across the cracked concrete. A wind picked up, rustling loose tarps and sending dust swirling through the yard. She stepped out of the truck and leaned against the hood, letting the metal dangle from her fingers. B. Tiernan. That name meant nothing to her now, but the weight of it was undeniable. A man had once driven this rig, worn this metal, kept that ledger. And whatever he was trying to pass down someone had tried to hide it, not throw it away. Tape didn't mean trash, it meant protection. Inside the garage, she cleared a corner workbench and laid out everything she'd found. Note, ledger, metal. She stared at them in silence, unsure whether she'd just bought a restoration project or stepped into someone else's unfinished story. Either way, it was hers now. She wasn't just fixing a truck anymore. She was chasing a ghost, and somewhere out there, the rest of the story was waiting to be pulled from the ashes. She stayed up most of that night reading through the ledger. Some pages were routine hydrant tests, tire rotations, old fuel receipts. But others felt like they were written in code. Shorthand notes that didn't line up with official reports. 2 stories, no windows blown odd. One line read. Another, hose B disconnected itself mid-pull. 3rd time this month. At first, it just seemed like frustration. But then came the final few entries, scribbled faster, sloppier. June 18. Unmarked call, no record. Tiernan refused backup. Then, the last. June 19. Last run, 303 East Walden. Smoke reported. No visible flame. Tiernan went in alone. He never came out. She whispered the address to herself. 303 East Walden. The name had a strange weight. A house fire? An accident? Why wasn't it in the official logs? She flipped back to the list of names in the ledger's personal section. Most were crossed out, but next to Tiernan's was a date and a single word, missing. That's what made it different. Firefighters didn't just go missing. If they were lost, the report said so. If they didn't make it, there was a memorial. But missing? That left something open. Something unresolved. She turned the metal over in her hand again. The chain had snapped cleanly, not rusted, not frayed like it had been pulled off in a moment that mattered. She stared at it for a long while before she slipped it into her pocket. Not to keep, not yet, just to hold it close. By morning, she was on her laptop in the dusty corner of her shop, trying to trace anything she could about Tiernan. She found an obituary, but not his. A woman, Rita Tiernan, widow of Battalion Chief Brendan Tiernan, passed away in 2019. No children, no surviving relatives listed. A fireman's photo was attached. Same name, same station, Engine 6. There was no mention of how or when he died. Only that he was honored in service and never recovered. The word never chilled her more than she expected. She looked at the photo again, Tiernan in full gear, standing in front of the very fire truck now parked outside her shop. The truck was cleaner then, newer, but unmistakable. Same ladder mount. Same dent on the front fender. She leaned in, trying to make out the expression behind his helmet's visor, but it was shadow, just a blur of reflection, like he never meant to be fully seen. She pulled back from the screen, blinking. This was real. The truck had a past, and somewhere deep inside it, behind the rust, behind the silence, was the truth about Tiernan's last ride. She didn't know why the salvage yard had listed it for $1. Maybe they wanted it gone. Maybe it was cursed, like the tow driver joked. But more likely, no one else wanted to carry the weight. She stood, stretched, and walked back out to the fire truck. Placed her hand on the hood, still warm from the Sunday. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's find out what really happened to you." The street was still there. 303 East Walden. She found it the next morning using an old property record database and a faded address on a piece of mail tucked inside the ledger. It was only an hour's drive from her garage, a town once busy with factory noise and working-class rhythm. Now, it moved like molasses, half the shops closed, streets sun-bleached, and sidewalks cracked like dry skin. She drove her beat-up truck through town, following her phone's GPS, until it buzzed. "You've arrived." The house at 303 looked abandoned, but not forgotten. The paint peeled in wide, curling strips, windows boarded up with rotted plywood. A rusted mailbox hung crooked on its post, and a red handprint child-sized was smeared near the door. Not fresh, but not faded either. She stood at the curb for a long time, engine idling, unsure why her chest felt so tight. Then she killed the ignition, got out, and walked up the cracked path. A man across the street was trimming a hedge that didn't need trimming. He watched her. She nodded politely, but he didn't nod back. Instead, he called out, without lowering the shears, "Ain't nothing in there worth fixing." She hesitated. "Do you know what happened here?" He paused, finally setting the clippers down. "I was just a kid," he said. "But yeah, fire started middle of the night. Said it was electrical. No one ever proved it. 2 kids made it out. Mother didn't. Firefighter went in, didn't come back. They never found him. Just his helmet in the hall. That truck sat out front for hours, hoses running, lights spinning. No one ever forgot the sound." He picked the clippers back up. "Nobody buys that house. Even the banks let it rot." She thanked him, though she wasn't sure for what. Back at her truck, she sat in silence. The sun was bright, but the air felt cold. She imagined the fire, how it must have glowed through these boarded windows, how the truck she now owned once screamed down this very street, how Tiernan ran inside not knowing he wouldn't come back out, and how his name ended up scribbled in a ledger, missing, with no one left to grieve him but a wife who died 20 years later with no family left. Back at the garage, she pulled the metal from her pocket again. This time, she hung it on a small nail above her workbench. Not as decoration, but as anchor. A reminder. She wasn't just rebuilding a fire truck. She was stitching together the last traces of a man no one seemed to remember. The fire truck loomed in the center of her bay, stripped in patches, now grill removed, panels tagged for sanding. She ran her hand along the frame and whispered, "We're not done yet." But deep inside, a question kept echoing louder. If Tiernan never made it out, why had his truck come back? What was it carrying that never left? The restoration started slow. Not because she lacked skill, she'd rebuilt engines blindfolded and welded through thunderstorms, but because this wasn't just rust. This was memory, and memory has weight. Every bolt she turned felt like peeling back time. Every piece she removed like unearthing someone else's story. The first week, she barely got past stripping the panels. Half the screws snapped. The frame groaned like it didn't want to be touched. She cursed under her breath, scraped her knuckles raw, and kept going. She documented everything, took photos, scribbled notes on parts she didn't recognize, cataloged every item she pulled from the truck's compartments. In one of the side lockers, beneath a rotted hose and a nest of mouse droppings, she found a melted flashlight and a folded firehouse roster sealed in plastic. Tiernan's name was circled. Again, someone, somewhere, wanted him remembered. She pinned the roster to the pegboard next to the metal and the note. Her workbench was starting to look less like a mechanic's desk and more like a shrine. The community didn't notice at first. Her garage wasn't on Main Street. She didn't post updates. But the smell of grinding metal and primer dust started catching noses. The first to knock on her door was a retired fire chief named Daryl. He'd heard a rumor about someone fixing up the old rig from Engine 6. He stood quietly for a long time, looking at it, before finally saying, "I pulled that rig out of service myself. Never thought I'd see her again." She offered him a stool. He stayed all afternoon, telling her what the truck used to look like, how it handled on icy roads, which parts never really worked right. Then came a teenager named Julian. Long hair, anxious hands, curious eyes. He wanted to help. Said he was thinking of dropping out of school, but liked working with his hands. She let him sand the panels. Then came Maria, a widowed schoolteacher who showed up with boxes of shop rags and lunch sandwiches. "My brother served with Tiernan," she said softly. "I just want to be around while you bring it back." Day by day, the space around her changed. The fire truck no longer felt like a secret project. It felt like a heartbeat. People who'd never met Tiernan brought photos. One man delivered a chrome bell he'd kept in his basement for decades. They told stories about late-night runs, pranks at the firehouse, calls that still haunted them. And somehow, with every dent pulled and every coat of primer laid down, she felt something rekindling inside herself. Something she thought she'd lost when the garage first closed. Purpose. Not for profit, not for reputation, but for something sacred. Late one night, after the last volunteer left, she stood in the truck's open cab, fingers gripping the worn steering wheel. The dashboard was half restored, the seat padding replaced. But in the quiet, she whispered aloud, "You're coming back. We both are." The first newspaper story came out on a Wednesday. Just a small piece, half a column on page 8, about a young woman restoring a fire truck with ties to a firefighter lost decades ago. She hadn't expected it. Maria must have tipped someone off. The article included a photo of her workbench, the metal, the roster, and the ledger laid out beneath a single shop light. It was quiet, respectful, and honest. But what followed wasn't quiet at all. The next morning, 3 people were waiting outside the garage before she opened. One brought a thermos of coffee. Another carried a folder of scanned newspaper clippings from the 1997 fire. The third didn't speak, just handed her a small weathered patch from Engine 6 and pointed at the truck. "He was my cousin," he said. "You're giving him back to us." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and opened the garage door wide. That weekend, the lot filled. Not a crowd, this wasn't a parade, but a steady rhythm of people with stories. A man who'd driven Engine 6 once for a county parade. A woman who remembered hearing the siren the night of the fire and waking her kids just in case. A boy who said his uncle had been pulled out of that very house back when he was too small to remember. Everyone had something to offer, a photo, a tool, a memory. She stopped calling them volunteers. They weren't helping her restore the truck. They were restoring themselves. Julian came every day after school now. He was quiet, but precise. Daryl taught him how to install rivets without overdriving the steel. Maria painted the side panel numbers in their original gold. A local welder dropped off a rebuilt ladder mount. The parts came from different hands, but the truck started to look whole again. Not like it had never been touched, but like it had been loved back into form. One afternoon, a man in his 70s stood near the open bay door, arms folded. He didn't speak at first, just watched. Then he stepped forward and handed her a small tape recorder in a Ziploc bag. "I shouldn't have kept this," he said, "but I didn't know what to do with it. It was dusty, half the buttons stuck, but the cassette inside was labeled in blue ink. E6, Final Dispatch." She held it like it was glass. "Is this Tiernan's?" The man's jaw tightened. "It was found in his jacket, left on the truck's front seat. Someone took it before the investigation closed. I couldn't let it disappear, but I didn't have the heart to listen, either." He looked at the truck, eyes distant. "I think you were meant to." She didn't play it that day. She placed it on the shelf above the metal and stared at it for a long time, after everyone had gone. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees. The fire truck, patched and sanded, stood tall. The silence felt sacred. Something was coming, She could feel it, and whatever it was already on its way home. She waited 3 days before pressing play. Something about the tape recorder demanded stillness, like whatever it held didn't belong in the noise of daylight or the chatter of tools. It needed reverence. So she waited until the shop was empty, the town quiet, the sky a deep blue bruised with dusk. She sat alone on a stool, elbows resting on the workbench, the recorder between her hands. The cassette label stared back at her. E6, Final Dispatch. She pressed her thumb into the play button. It stuck for a moment, then clicked. At first, only static. Then, a crackle. Then the distant sound of a radio squawk, the kind used in old analog fire rigs. A voice came through. Male. Measured. Calm. Under pressure. Engine 6 en route. Tiernan reporting. Heavy smoke at East Walden. Occupants confirmed. 1 adult, 2 minors. Entering structure now. A pause. Then a breath. Request backup. Another crackle. Then silence. She leaned in. What came next was faint, muffled. Background noise. Wind? No. Breathing. Tiernan again. Entering northeast corner. Heavy heat. No flame. His voice was lower now. Slower. Something's wrong. It's not behaving like a normal structure fire. Hallway shifts. Can't find door frames. Feels like I'm turning in circles. Another pause. I need light. More static. Then soft and chilling, he whispered. Tell Rita I'm sorry. Silence followed. A long one. Then a sudden burst of sound. Alarms, feedback, frantic breathing. The last thing the recorder captured before it cut off was a final word. Spoken not to the radio, not to the world, but to the truck itself. If I don't come back, Tiernan said, voice breaking, take care of them. Oh, the tape clicked to a stop. She sat there for a long time, unmoving, not crying, not blinking, just absorbing. The metal, the ledger, the names suddenly, they weren't history. They were echoes. And now she'd heard the last one. Tiernan hadn't just gone missing. He'd walked into something no protocol could explain. And somehow, some way, his voice survived, captured in metal, trapped in plastic, and passed down through time. She pressed rewind and listened again, and again. Each time the weight of it grew heavier, not because it was tragic, but because it was unfinished. Tiernan's voice hadn't sounded panicked. It had sounded devoted. His last thoughts weren't of escape, but of protection, of Rita, of the truck, of the people it would carry next. She looked at the fire truck, silhouetted in the doorway of her garage, bathed in amber light. The sides were still bare, the engine still out. But now, every weld she made wouldn't just be for restoration. It would be a kind of burial rite, a resurrection. She picked up the metal from its nail, the chain cool against her fingers, and hung it over the rearview mirror of the truck's cab. Then she climbed inside, sat behind the wheel, and closed her eyes. I hear you, she whispered. We're bringing you home. The day they fired up the engine, no one spoke. It had taken weeks of late nights and calloused hands. Julian rewired the harnesses by hand. Daryl rebuilt the fuel system from scratch. A retired EMT named Karen brought in a spare ignition module and told stories about Tiernan between bites of her sandwich. Every wire was double-checked, every gasket replaced. The engine block, once frozen with grime and time, gleamed under the hood like it had been waiting for this moment. When she turned the key and the engine coughed to life loud, uneven, real, the shop didn't erupt in cheers. It just filled with breath. Like the truck had inhaled again after 26 years. Outside, the sky was heavy with low clouds, the kind that blurred the horizon. She guided the fire truck slowly down the ramp, tires crunching the gravel. The restored bell rang softly with each bump. Daryl had insisted it be functional. It took nearly 20 minutes just to reach Main Street. The truck was old, stubborn, heavy, but it moved, and that was enough. She didn't tell anyone she was taking it out that morning. No flyers, No fanfare. Just her behind the wheel. St. Florian medal swaying on the mirror. Tiernan's tape recorder tucked in the glove box like a silent passenger. She drove past the bakery, past the old movie theater, past the courthouse where the town used to gather on holidays. A few people came out to their porches. One man saluted without smiling. A woman pressed her hand to her chest and whispered something she couldn't hear. She drove slow. Not because the truck demanded it, but because the moment did. As she approached East Walden, her throat tightened. She didn't plan on going there, but the wheel turned like it already knew. The house was still standing rotting, silent, abandoned, but it didn't feel like a place of fear anymore. The truck idled at the curb, engine rumbling low like a voice saying, "We came back." She sat there for a moment, staring through the cracked windshield. Then she reached over, opened the glove box, and pressed play. Tiernan's voice filled the cab again. Not loud, not eerie, just present. She let it play. This time, she didn't flinch when he said Rita's name. This time, when he said take care of them, she whispered back, "We are." She turned the truck around and headed home. The engine stronger now, the ride smoother. As she crossed the town center, she saw something on the firehouse steps, a folded red banner, and a crowd. No one had told her. No one needed to. The town knew. And now, they were waiting. She parked the truck in front, engine humming like a hymn. Someone handed her a microphone. Her hands trembled. She wasn't a speaker. She was a mechanic. But she looked at the faces, young, old, proud, and something settled in her spine. "I didn't restore a truck," she said. "I answered a call. The morning of the parade, the whole town felt different. Flags hung from porches that hadn't flown anything in years. People swept sidewalks that had been ignored all summer. The high school band tuned up on the corner near the diner. It wasn't official, there was no permit, no mayor's speech, no news crews, but everyone knew. Word had spread like wildfire without a single flyer. This wasn't for the world. It was for them. She arrived just after dawn. The fire truck gleamed in the pale light, polished to a deep scarlet glow that seemed to carry its own heat. Tiernan Red, someone had started calling it. She didn't correct them. It felt right. Daryl checked the tires. Julian wiped down the chrome one more time. Maria handed her a folded piece of cloth with tears in her eyes. "He should have come home to this," she whispered. "But you brought home what mattered." She climbed into the driver's seat, heart hammering. It wasn't stage fright. It was something older, sacred. She wasn't just driving a restored fire truck. She was delivering a memory to rest. The route was only a few blocks, but every step of it was lined with people, some holding photos of lost family, some holding nothing but each other. A group of retired firefighters walked ahead of the truck, shoulder to shoulder, each wearing black bands over one sleeve. Behind them, the high school drumline kept a slow, reverent beat. Children waved. Elders wept quietly. It was less of a parade and more of a procession, a funeral held decades late, finally allowed to breathe. As she steered the truck past the old firehouse, the doors swung open. A bell rang 3 times, then silence. She brought the truck to a stop. A podium had been set up, nothing fancy, just a crate and a microphone. She didn't plan to speak again, but someone handed her a letter. It was folded carefully, addressed in faded ink. She recognized the handwriting from the ledger, "To the one who brings her home." Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "I don't know your name. I don't know if you're a firefighter or a mechanic or just someone who felt something when they looked at her. But if you're reading this, you did what I couldn't. You brought her back. You honored the people she carried, the lives she touched, and the promise I whispered when I thought no one would hear. Thank you. From wherever I am, I'm riding with you. Brendan Tiernan." She read it aloud, voice cracking halfway through. When she finished, the crowd stood in silence. Then, one by one, the retired firefighters raised their hands in salute. Not to her, but to the truck, to what it represented, to who it remembered. As she drove it back toward the garage that evening, the street empty once more, the fire truck didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt light. like something had been laid to rest. Not just a man, not just a machine, but the silence that had lingered too long between them. She didn't open the garage the next morning. Not right away. For the first time in months, there were no parts waiting to be ordered, no wiring to trace, no questions from Julian, or deliveries from Maria. The fire truck sat parked in Bay 1, gleaming in soft morning light. It looked complete, but not just in paint and chrome. It radiated something deeper, like it knew its purpose had been fulfilled, like it had finally been understood. She walked around it slowly, fingertips grazing the smooth metal panels, the now shining ladder, the St. Florian metal swaying gently from the rear view. The truck didn't feel like a project anymore. It felt like a story told completely, cover to cover. She didn't cry. She just nodded to herself, quietly, the way someone does when they finally find the end of a sentence that's taken years to finish. The parade had sparked something she hadn't expected. People kept showing up asking if she could restore other vehicles, telling her stories about grandfather's tow trucks, a neighbor's delivery van from the 50s, a boat engine with a past. But she didn't say yes to everything. She wasn't in the business of fixing machines. She was in the business of honoring memory. And not every engine carried that kind of soul. Julian kept coming. Even after the fire truck was done, he swept the floors, cleaned the tools, asked about spark plugs and fuel maps. One afternoon, he handed her a business card he designed himself. Wrench, memory, auto restoration with heart. She laughed, but kept it, pinned it next to Tiernan's letter. Maria started hosting Saturday morning community breakfasts in the garage, long folding tables filled with donated muffins, chipped coffee mugs, and long conversations. Daryl taught a class once a month on vehicle safety for teenagers. Karen ran a grief group for first responders in the back office. The shop had become a heartbeat, not loud, not flashy, but steady. Like the fire truck itself. Present, purposeful, resilient. She restored a few more vehicles after that. A school bus, a 1930s milk truck. But none of them were like Engine 6. None of them spoke. Tiernan's voice, now digitized and gently cleaned up by a local audio engineer, became part of a traveling exhibit on unsolved service losses. But the original cassette? That stayed in her drawer, alongside the ledger, the folded "Do Not Forget" note, the patch, and the letter. Sometimes she still sat in the fire truck after hours. Lights off, bay doors closed, no movement, no music, just the creak of cooling metal and the soft tick of memory settling into place. One night, she whispered, "Thank you," without even realizing it. And somehow, she felt the words, land. Because what you restore has a way of restoring you. And what you believe in, even when no one else does, has a way of carrying you home. The truck was never just steel. Tiernan was never just lost. And she was never just a girl with a wrench. She was the keeper of stories, the builder of bridges, the one who saw worth buried beneath rust and dared to bring it back to life.